This is a WW3 Emergency Update. It's currently January 25th, 2024, and the time is 3:38 p.m. Eastern Time here in the United States. We open with the NATO officially preparing for World War III, and Russian TV predicts World War III openly. Why is NATO preparing for World War III? In his first major speech as British Defense Secretary, Grant Shapps said that Britain should prepare for war with China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea in the next 5 years. Prioritizing remilitarization over economic growth is dangerously short-sighted. If the UK and US tried to take on the 4 countries on Shapps' blacklist, there would be 8 enemy troops to every British or American soldier, notes British Unheard. Last week was a truly strange time in the British Isles. In his first major speech as British Defense Secretary, Grant Shapps said that Britain should prepare for war with China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea in the next 5 years. Meanwhile, in Dublin, Chinese Premier Li Qiang met Irish Taoiseach Leo Varadkar and touted the huge potential of deeper economic and trade cooperation between the two countries. Ireland and Britain are both close allies of the United States and are stitched into the same global security architecture. Why, then, is one country preparing for war while the other is boosting ties with the supposed enemy? The only possible answer to this question is that the Irish government does not think such a conflict is going to take place. So, who does? The answer appears to be NATO, which last week announced it would begin drills for a third world war. Yes, NATO wants to prepare for World War III, that is, a global conflict which would likely escalate into a nuclear war and destroy the world. At surface level, it would appear as if the adults have left the room. A closer look provides even more evidence of this. Consider Shapps' newly defined axis of evil. Taken together, these countries boast a total of 8.2 million troops, counting both active army personnel and reserves. Yet shortly after his apocalyptic speech, the Defense Secretary was on the defensive, insisting that the British Army would not dip below 73,000. Even adding America to the mix produces an army which pales in comparison to its supposed adversary. The U.S. Army, currently in the midst of a terrible recruitment crisis, has a total of 1.07 million troops. If the UK and US tried to take on the 4 countries on Shapps' blacklist, there would be 8 enemy troops to every British or American soldier. Then consider how we would get those soldiers from here to there. Earlier this month, it was announced that UK aircraft carriers cannot be sent to the Red Sea thanks to a shortage of sailors. As in America, the British military is experiencing an extreme shortage of personnel due to a recruitment crisis. Is this reversible in the 5-year time horizon Shapps is giving for World War III? Not a chance. Is he then suggesting that Britain should conscript all military-age men to fight the new axis of evil? How might that poll with the public? The reality is that these machinations can be boiled down to NATO's attempt to regain relevance against the backdrop of a deteriorating situation in Ukraine. The alliance threw all its weight behind Volodymyr Zelensky's nation, and it is no secret that the war is not going well for them. Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico claimed that Ukrainian concessions are necessary to bring the conflict to an end, and reiterated his opposition to Kiev joining NATO. The alliance's backup plan appears to involve preparing the Western world for total global war and potential nuclear annihilation. In the past few years, it has become popular to posture over conflict with Beijing. Politicians and talking heads say that we must rearm to meet the threat of a rising China, yet we are never told what this conflict would look like and how we would win. Nor are we ever instructed on when the militarization will take place, how much it will cost, or how it will work. It is always signaled that this remilitarization will happen at a vague point in the future. Perhaps it is time for proponents to fill in the blanks. Now, this really shocked me. Russian state TV predicts World War III. A top Kremlin propagandist predicted that World War III will break out in the Middle East, stemming from the Israel-Hamas war, and that this will distract the world from Russia's ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Margarita Simonyan, the editor-in-chief of the Russian state-controlled media organization Russia Today, made the comment during a state TV broadcast. The Daily Beast's Julia Davis shared an excerpt of her remarks on state TV channel Russia 1, where she spoke alongside host Vladimir Solovyov, one of the most prominent figures in Kremlin-backed media. Margarita Simonian predicted that WW3 would soon start in the Middle East and expressed her hope that it would distract the West from Russia, Davis wrote on Sunday in a post on X, formerly Twitter, alongside the video. Meanwhile in Russia, Vladimir Solovyov claimed that satanic NATO started the war when it attacked Russia. Kremlin propagandists have routinely warned of a looming world war. Ties between Washington and Moscow have become increasingly strained over Russian President Vladimir Putin's decision to launch a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Will there be a World War III? I think that World War III will certainly happen. There's bad news and good news about this, Simonian, a loyal ally of Putin, began. The bad news is that it will happen without fail and in our lifetime. As long as a brick doesn't fall on our head tomorrow, it will happen in the near future. The good news is that we won't participate in it, said Simonian, adding that Russia will be observing from the sidelines. A world war will definitely break out, and it will break out in the Middle East. It will fire up for sure, there's no way around it, the Kremlin propagandist continued. However tragic it is that there'll be a war and casualties, the good news in it for us is that Western powers will be distracted with that, and even though they won't completely leave us alone, they will kind of forget about us. Simonian previously said she believed a world war would break out following Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7, 2023. Last October, Simonian said on state TV that the US and the UK were leaving Ukraine and now have no more time for Ukraine amid the Israel-Hamas war because the world is on the brink of World War III. She also said Iran is an enormous military nation that is 5 minutes away from getting a nuclear bomb and possesses many other interesting things. How is the Israeli army planning to handle Iran? I wanted to say, I'd like to see that, but no, I would not want to see that, Simonian added. I don't wish for anyone to see that because this is on the brink of why? At this point, no one cares about Ukraine? And our WW3 fears explode as Vladimir Putin flies close to NATO countries in fresh threat. Vladimir Putin visited a Russian exclave that could become a possible key battleground in a war between NATO and Russia. Several NATO members were placed on alert today as Vladimir Putin visited a tiny Russian exclave, seemingly playing on Europe's fears of World War III. The Russian president traveled to Kaliningrad, the exclave overlooking the Baltic Sea wedged between Poland and Lithuania, on Thursday. Putin's presidential plane remained in international waters, but flew dangerously close to Finland, the Baltic region, and Sweden's Gotland Island before arriving in the Russian region. During Putin's trip, a NATO military A330 243 MRTT reconnaissance plane from the Netherlands Air Force was reportedly seen circling over the Baltic Sea. Speaking about the visit to the exclave, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov denied Putin was sending a message to NATO, saying, "This is not a message to NATO countries when the president visits the regions of the Russian Federation. It is not a message to NATO countries. This is the main thing that the president does, and the main thing is not to send messages, but what he has been doing for many years, working on the development of our country, our regions, developing the economy. The project of economic development of individual regions will be in the meeting on the development of Kaliningrad today." The Russian president, who had last visited Kaliningrad in September 2022, toured the Kant Baltic Federal University and signed a commemorative note during the trip. Given it is sandwiched between two NATO members, Kaliningrad is seen as a possible key battleground in a conflict between the Western Military Alliance and Russia. A military report by the German Armed Forces envisioning how Russia could spark World War III mentioned the mobilization of troops and medium-range missiles to Kaliningrad as one of Putin's key steps ahead of an attack on NATO's eastern flank. Germany isn't the only nation to have voiced concerns over Russia's increased danger to the safety of the continent. And we do need to worry because Russia's heavy losses in its full-scale invasion of Ukraine mean that Moscow now sees its battlefield nuclear weapons as increasingly important in deterring and defeating NATO, according to a new report from the International Institute for Strategic Studies, IISS, which warns that the West must wake up to the rising nuclear threat. On February 24, 2022, as the first tanks rolled over the Ukrainian border at the outset of the invasion, Russian President Vladimir Putin gave a televised address warning the world of consequences you have never faced in your history if anyone tried to stop Russia, a threat widely seen as nuclear saber-rattling by the Kremlin. The IISS report says fear of escalation with Russia has caused the West to hesitate in supplying arms to Kyiv. But nearly 2 years on, a declassified U.S. intelligence report last month estimated Russia has lost around 315,000 troops in Ukraine since the outset of the invasion, nearly 90% of its pre-war army, much of it at the hands of weapons donated by the West. Russia has less confidence now in their conventional capabilities because of everything they've lost in the Ukraine war, said William Alberk, the report author and director of strategy, technology, and arms control at IISS. That means Moscow's shorter-range atomic weapons, known non-strategic nuclear weapons, or NSNW, designed for use on the battlefield, are becoming increasingly important to the Kremlin, according to Alberk. Russia has basically short-range and medium-range, air-launched, ground-launched, and sea-launched missiles capable of delivering nuclear warheads throughout the theater and able to hold all of NATO at risk. NATO itself lacks sort of a countervailing capability to match the Russian capability. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said that the use of any nuclear weapon by Russia in Ukraine would fundamentally change the nature of the conflict and would have consequences. Russia believes NATO does not have the resolve to respond with its own nuclear weapons, according to the IISS report, which says it is vital for the West to recalibrate its own deterrence. In another news, the U.S. government privately warned Iran that the Islamic State group's affiliate in Afghanistan was preparing to carry out a terrorist attack before bombings in Kerman earlier this month that killed 95 people, a U.S. official said Thursday. The official, who was not authorized to comment and insisted on anonymity to discuss the intelligence, said the U.S. was following its long-standing policy of a duty to warn other governments against potential lethal threats. The official did not detail how the United States, which does not have diplomatic relations with Iran, conveyed the warning about its intelligence on ISIS Khorasan, known as ISIS-K, but noted that government officials provide these warnings in part because we do not want to see innocent lives lost in terror attacks. Iranian state media did not acknowledge the U.S. giving Tehran the information, and Iran's mission to the United Nations did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Furthermore, the Chinese vice foreign minister visits North Korea to boost ties. North Korea said Friday it was hosting a visit by a Chinese government delegation led by Vice Foreign Minister Sun Weidong as it continues its efforts to strengthen ties with Beijing and Moscow in the face of deepening confrontations with Washington. The North's official Korean Central News Agency said Sun's delegation arrived in the capital, Pyongyang, on Thursday after crossing the land border between the countries. The report didn't provide further details about the visit. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has been trying to boost the visibility of its partnership with China and Russia as he tries to break out of diplomatic isolation and strengthen his regional footing by joining a united front against the United States. Kim traveled to Russia's Far East in September for a rare summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Some experts say he is also likely seeking a meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. While Kim has prioritized his ties with Russia, something that has raised concerns about an arms cooperation that would help fuel Putin's war on Ukraine. He has also invited senior Chinese officials to major state events and vowed to strengthen bilateral relations. A Chinese delegation led by Vice Premier Liu Guozhang attended the celebrations for North Korea's 75th founding anniversary last September, shortly before Kim's trip to Russia. In July, Kim invited Chinese ruling party official Li Hongzhang and Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu to a major military parade in Pyongyang, where he rolled out his most powerful, potentially nuclear-capable missiles targeting the United States, South Korea, and Japan. As North Korea's major ally and economic lifeline, China is a crucial partner for Kim's efforts to revive an economy crippled by decades of mismanagement and U.S.-led sanctions over his nuclear weapons and missile program, which he has aggressively expanded in recent years despite limited resources. As permanent members of the UN Security Council, both China and Russia have been thwarting U.S.-led efforts to increase sanctions on the North over its intensified weapons testing in recent months, underscoring a divide deepened over Russia's war on Ukraine. Washington and Seoul have been urging Beijing to use its economic leverage on North Korea to help persuade Kim's government to return to nuclear disarmament negotiations, which have stalled since 2019.